The European all-season tyre, also known as an all-weather tyre in North America, is a tyre that tries to be good in everything, but as we know, that's not yet possible. This means tyre manufacturers often remove ability in one area to give in another. So which of these tyres is best for you? To find out, I've rounded up 10 of the latest and greatest all-season tyres in the very popular 225/45 17-inch tyre size. As always, I'll be putting these through the usual array of snow, wet, dry, noise, comfort and rolling resistance tests to tell you exactly which tyre is best for your own situation. On test, we have the Bridgestone WeatherControl A005 Evo, the Continental AllSeasonContact, the Falken Euroall AllSeason AS210, the Goodyear Vector 4Season Generation 3, the Hankook Kinergy 4S2, the Kleber Quadraxer 2, the Michelin CrossClimate 2, the Pirelli Cinturato AllSeason SF2, the Tomket Allyear 3, and the Vredestein Quatrac Pro. The Michelin CrossClimate 2 dominated last year's test. Can it do it again this year? Let's find out. Snow handling, and before I go through the results, I want you to keep in mind that these are all-season tyres, so the snow performance of the tyre might range from very, very important because you live in somewhere like the north of Germany that sees a lot of snow and you do a lot of snow running, to absolutely not important because you live in the south of the UK and you just want a tyre that's better than the summer tyre for that once in 5 years we get snow. And let me tell you, they are all better than the summer tyre. And keep in mind when looking at the lap time, the lap here is very long, but there is quite a big spread in lap time. There's over 12% from the best to worst, which is way more than the winter tyre test, which I finished yesterday. And subscribe for that, I'm sure that'll be out in a couple of weeks. The slowest tyre on test, a full 15 seconds behind the best, was the Bridgestone WeatherControl A005 Evo. Now, as I've just said, all-season tyres are different for different people, and the Bridgestone often does well in the dry and wet. We are going to find that out soon, but in the snow, it was a handful. It was the most difficult to drive subjectively. It left you fighting for grip. It was the only tyre I touched a snowbank on, and I touched 2 of them. Luckily, I didn't get stuck. Next up was the Vredestein Quatrac Pro and the Falken AS210. Both these tyres were a lot easier to drive. They were both understeer primary. They were just a little bit weaker in grip in all directions, so braking and turning. They didn't give you any nasty surprises, but again, as I've said, they just didn't have the most amount of grip, so they ended up around 9 seconds off the leaders. Next up was the Pirelli Cinturato All-Season SF2, around 7 seconds or 5.7% off the best. This tyre did have a little bit more oversteer than the rest of the tyres, as I'm demonstrating, although I'm not actually driving on that tyre at the moment, but it just didn't have as much grip, so it ended up in 7th place. In 6th place was the Tomket Allyear 3. Now this tyre, for its price point, this is the budget tyre of the test. This tyre did have better levels of grip, but it didn't give you a huge amount of communication, and it was very understeer primary, which meant you were hesitating on the throttle a lot more than any of the other tyres because you just didn't know when the grip was going to break away. I'm going to be interested to see how this one does on the brakes, as some of the other ones, because I've not done braking yet. But yeah, a reasonable result for a tyre that's priced very competitively. Let's see how that rolls out into the dry and wet. In 5th place was the Continental AllSeasonContact, around 5% off the best, and in 4th place the Goodyear Vector 4Season Generation 3, around 4% off the best. Both these tyres felt very similar to drive. They were both secure feeling tyres. They just had a bit of understeer in the car, but they did feel very good on the brakes. These were the first tyres of the group where you really felt like positivity on the brakes. 3rd place was the ever impressive Hankook Kinergy 4S2. Now, I drove this tyre last a couple of years ago and I really liked it then, and I'm back really liking it in this 17-inch size. Good levels of grip, perhaps a bit too much front axle, meaning you did get a bit of oversteer like the Pirelli, but that helped it around the lap, and I feel like this tyre will also be quite good on the brakes. In 2nd place was the Kleber Quadraxer 2. Now, this tyre felt a lot like the Goodyear and Continental, just with a tiny amount more grip. Understeer primary and still 3% off the best. And yes, that's 3% off the best, which was the Michelin CrossClimate 2. Now, as I said earlier, yesterday I finished a winter tyre test, and as I test blind, so I don't know what tyres I'm using when I'm driving and just taking notes and set numbers, I had to check at the end of the test they hadn't snuck in a winter tyre to throw me off. The difference was that vast. It was as fast in terms of grip at the front of the pack as the Bridgestone was at the back of the pack, but it wasn't just grip, it was subjective as well. So the tyre felt really positive on the brakes, had an excellent front end, and it would just pull you into the corners like other tyres wouldn't. So an all-round very impressive tyre from Michelin. The CrossClimate 2 backed up its excellent handling performance with the shortest dry braking, closely followed by Goodyear. You can find the snow traction results on the link in the description. Wet handling. unable to continue its reasonable performance in the snow, the Tomket budget tyre is a 10 out of 10 if you want to show off to your mates by drifting around a wet car park or a wet roundabout with loads of oversteer, and a 0 out of 10 if you want a safe, balanced car. This tyre was so oversteery and non-communicative, so you didn't know when it was going to oversteer. It's the first time I've ever made an error so big I've ended up on a different wet handling track, which is a little bit embarrassing. The tyre was also 12 seconds a lap off the best, and although 12 seconds doesn't sound like a huge amount of time, it's only 12 seconds. That translates to what is a near undrivable package. So I've said it a million times before, avoid budget all season tyres. They can be good in one area. We've proven this tyre was okay in snow, but they can't be good in all the areas. They never are, like some premium tyres can be. Kleber and Pirelli were next. Now these were 5% off the best, so you can see it's actually quite a close group apart from the budget tyre, and subjectively they were miles better than the budget tyre. The incredible snow domination of the Michelin CrossClimate 2 unfortunately seems to have come at the expense a little bit of wet handling. Now it's only 2.4%, but in a very, very capable group of tyres, 2.4% obviously makes a difference. It had probably the safest, most pleasant understeer balance. It was a very easy tyre to drive, but also when you're trying to go quickly, it was quite a frustrating tyre to drive, because although it felt good on the brakes, mid-corner, as you're accelerating, you just pick up some understeer and it wasn't communicated very well, and then you were just waiting on the throttle, which meant the lap time, you just lost some time across the lap. The Bridgestone A005 Evo was next, and that surprised me when I was working out who was who, because I test blind, because Bridgestone is generally, in the all-season and winter products, exceptional in the wet, and their new summer products actually, they're normally very, very good in the wet. And I'm not saying the A005 Evo was bad, it just wasn't up there with the very best. Like some of the other tyres, it was pleasant to drive, it just had a bit of understeer. Continental was next with the AllSeason now only 1.5% off the best, so you can see how close it is. And of the tyres, it was one of my favourites to drive because it just felt a little bit sporty for an all-season tyre. Had nicely weighted steering, it was accurate, gave you good feedback, and you could really hustle it around the lap, and it had good grip. Fantastic tyre. Next up was Falken in fourth, and I'm not entirely sure how to describe the handling of this tyre because my note says sporty and spongy, so sporgy? Is that, can we make that a term, sporgy handling? It actually had very quick steering on initial turn-in, so the tyre turned the car very quickly, but then it kind of like sat down onto its shoulder, so it was an interesting combination of things, but the grip was excellent, so no complaints from me for the Falken. Very good tyre. Third and second were Goodyear and Hankook. Now some of the tyres in this test have had a little bit too much oversteer, some of them have had a little bit too much understeer. The Goodyear was what I'm calling the Goldilocks tyres. It was just right. From a every person tyre to drive, the Goodyear was lovely. Predictable, safe, outstanding grip, consistent lap times, enjoyable tyre. Hankook was second, and it had the quickest first lap pace, but as we do 4 laps and average them out, it also had one of the largest difference between the first and the fourth lap as the tyre grip evolved, so it could only finish second overall. And the fastest tyre in test was the Vredestein Quatrac Pro. Now we wondered in snow handling where it didn't really perform that well, whether the asymmetric tread pattern would have some payback in the dry and wet, and in the wet at least, it definitely has. It felt the most like the summer tyre, by the smallest of margins, perhaps had a little bit too much oversteer in the balance that you'd really want, that helped the lap time, and the grip was outstanding, including braking. It felt like probably the best tyre on the brakes.
And it was, winning the wet braking test by over a metre compared to the second placed Hankook. The budget Tomket tyre braking performance was yet another reminder why cheap tyres just aren't sensible choices, taking over 10 metres longer to stop from just 80 kph. Hankook and Goodyear were very impressive in straight aquaplaning. You can find the data from curved aquaplaning on the Tyre Reviews website.
I might be sat in a Golf GTI right now for dry handling having a lot of fun, but I actually did dry handling in 150 horsepower Golf TSI for various reasons I'll explain in another video. That means the overall results are very, very close between all the tyres. But there were a few interesting things I want to talk about, so here they are. While none of the tyres were awful, even the budget was reasonable round the lap. It did have a bit too much oversteer and a bit vague steering, but once it was loaded up, it wasn't drastically different from the best. I think the biggest disappointment was the Vredestein Quatrac Pro. Now again, I'm not saying this is a bad tyre, but after its amazing performance in the wet and the asymmetric pattern promising sporty dry handling, it just didn't follow through. But I guess this highlights how difficult it is to have good wet and dry performance in the same tyre. It's just a blend of qualities that's very difficult to achieve, especially with sipes, so you have some performance in the snow. The good group of tyres were Hankook, Continental and Goodyear. These three tyres, they just worked really nicely with the Golf, and I was pleasantly surprised. I have run a few laps with them on the GTI as well, just to see the time difference. It was about 2 seconds a lap, but they, yeah, really impressive tyres. The turn-in was pretty nice, the balance was good. Again, I've said in wet handling, this is for an all-season tyre, so don't think these are like nailed direct summer tyres for dry handling, but this is quite out of the ordinary of their usage pattern. And the very good tyre was the Bridgestone WeatherControl A0005 Evo. It didn't quite have it in the wet, but it was, I genuinely really enjoyed it in the dry. Some of the corners, you were just tipping the car in, the steering would react nicely, you'd get good amounts of feedback, and the balance would just, you could just use the throttle and the brake to move the car around a little bit, which for an all-season tyre, I was like, wow, this is mega. Fair play, Bridgestone. Fair play to all of the tyres. None of you were bad in this group of all-season tyres. You may have noticed I've missed out a tyre here, the Michelin CrossClimate 2. Now, the Michelin CrossClimate 2 was the fastest tyre over a single lap, but the compound did seem to struggle a little bit across the 3 laps I did to average out the time, which meant its advantage wasn't as obvious as it usually is. The Michelin CrossClimate 2 is a very, very good all-season tyre in dry handling, but it is now definitely an all-season tyre. You can't call it a summer tyre with winter capabilities anymore, because it's merged into the pack in dry handling, but in dry braking, it did still have a significant advantage, which should just be leaving the screen now conveniently, so we can move on to the conclusion.
The rolling resistance of the tyre should be on screen now. There was a 20% difference between the best and the worst tyres, which translates to around 7% in fuel use. Bridgestone and Pirelli led the group by quite a margin, with third place Michelin 5% behind. Avoid the Vredestein and Falken if you are sensitive to fuel costs. Sadly, I didn't get time to do my normal in-depth comfort testing, but I did spend a lot of time considering the comfort of the tyres as I moved around the test facility, and honestly, none of them stood out as particularly bad. In my notes, I actually graded every tyre as A. We also measured internal noise, but the difference was almost nothing. There's plenty of comfort data from other tests on the Tyre Reviews website, so go check that out there. Like last year, I'll be giving the overall results with the same balanced score weighting as my 2021 all-season tyre test, where dry, wet and snow take near equal importance in the final results. And also like last year, I'll be giving you a mild climate set of results where snow is dropped down to 5% and the dry and wet ability of the tyres take a higher priority. Basically, if you expect to see snow for more than a few days a year, the balanced score weighting is probably more for you. But if you live in a climate like the UK where snow is a rare occurrence, then the mild climate results are probably more applicable. There are a few differences between the two sets of results, so I'll explain this as I go along. But now, even better for this year, you can go to the Tyre Reviews website and adjust the score weighting of this test to your own taste to get the perfect set of tyres for you. In last place, by a significant margin in both score weightings, was the Tomket Allyear 3. The Tomket once again proved that a budget tyre can do fine in one category. It was good in the snow, but then be a disaster in other areas, with a 10.5 metre difference stopping the Golf from just 50 miles an hour and really difficult wet handling. Please don't fit this tyre. In 9th place overall was the Kleber Quadraxer 2. This tyre had an excellent performance in all the snow test and was one of the best aquaplaning performances, but sadly couldn't keep up in the dry and wet grip test where it had long braking and poor handling results. In 8th place overall was the Pirelli Cinturato AllSeason SF2. This was a disappointing result for the SF2, and while it did have the lowest rolling resistance on test and very good dry braking, it was let down by an average snow performance and low grip in the wet. I've actually spoken to Pirelli about this result, as the SF2 seems to have a variable results in test depending on the date and size, and Pirelli have informed me that unfortunately this tyre was an older spec tyre which has now been updated with significantly more grip in all conditions. I'll be sure to retest this next year, of course. 7th place was awarded to the Vredestein Quatrac Pro. This tyre was an absolute beast in the wet, with the shortest wet braking by over a metre and the fastest wet handling lap by a significant margin. Sadly, a mid-pack dry braking was its next best highlight, as the tyre struggled in both aquaplaning tests, had low grip in the snow and very high rolling resistance. The Falken Euroall AllSeason AS210 was 6th, with a very similar overall performance and score to the Vredestein. In fact, the Vredestein and Falken were so close their places swap in the different score weightings. Like the Vredestein, it was most at home in the wet, and like the Vredestein, its snow performance couldn't match the best or even the average of the group. It also had a high rolling resistance, but it did however have the lowest internal noise. The Bridgestone WeatherControl A005 Evo might just be the all-season tyre of the group, designed specifically for climates which get minimal snow. As in the balanced score weighting, it finishes 5th, but in the mild climate score weighting, it jumps up to 2nd place overall. As the results imply, this tyre was great in the dry, pretty good in the wet, and had the joint lowest rolling resistance on test, but it was a firm last in the snow. Even though I didn't include a summer reference tyre this time, I do know the Bridgestone will still vastly outperform any summer tyre on snow. However, compared to a good all-season tyre, it was, well, pretty bad. Definitely an all-season tyre for a climate where snow is the exception rather than the rule. The Continental AllSeasonContact might be one of the older all-season tyres in the group now, but it's still performing well with a solid balanced result in all categories. I do like consistency in the tyre, and while the Continental didn't win any of the tests, it didn't do badly in any test either, with a solid string of 4th and 5th places, putting it in 4th place overall in the balanced score weighting and 5th in the mild climate. I recommend this tyre. The Goodyear Vector 4Season Generation 3 did have a poor result in my all-season test last year, but that was certainly an outlier rather than the rule, and I'm happy that it's back exactly where I expect it to be. The only drawback, which we've seen before, was average dry braking, but it was consistently amongst the best in the wet, including the aquaplaning results and in the snow. I'm happy to give this tyre the Tyre Review's highly recommended award again. The Hankook Kinergy 4S2 H750 finishes an impressive 2nd in the balanced results, but an even more impressive win in the mild climate score weighting. The Hankook was just incredibly consistent, finishing 1st place in both aquaplaning tests, 2nd in wet handling, wet braking and dry braking, 3rd in snow handling, and 4th in snow traction, snow braking and dry handling. Its only letdown, which we have seen in other tests, is a higher than average rolling resistance, but given how exceptional this tyre is in every other category, I highly recommend this tyre. Outstanding work by Hankook. And finally, the Michelin CrossClimate 2 wins the test in the balance scoring, but does drop to 3rd in the mild climate results. Why? Look, the CrossClimate 2 is quite frankly ridiculously good in the snow. I ran this all-season test alongside my winter test in the same size, so subscribe for the results of that. That should be out in a few weeks. And if the CrossClimate 2 was in the winter tyre test, it would have been better than half the winter tyres in the snow. It also had a very low rolling resistance and had the shortest dry braking, which is the Michelin CrossClimate's party piece. However, it seems to have lost its significant lead in the dry, as it was just 1.5% ahead of the Hankook in dry braking, and it no longer has the subjective lead in dry handling. The Bridgestone won that show. But the biggest reason it could only finish 3rd in the mild climate results because of its wet performance. It was great in straight aquaplaning, but it was only mid-pack in wet braking and struggled a little during the wet handling laps. The CrossClimate 2 is certainly an exceptional all-season tyre and worthy of the test-winning award, but I do hope for the next generation of CrossClimate, Michelin trades some of that incredible snow performance and give it a little bit more in the dry and in particularly the wet, to bring back what the original CrossClimate was, and that is a summer tyre with winter capabilities, because that's why we all fell in love with the CrossClimate. Depending on where you are in the world, any of the top 3 or 4 tyres in this test could be the perfect tyre for you. Like I said at the start, they all have different personalities, so head over to the Tyre Review's website and put in your own score weighting to see what tyre suits your desires. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what your next set of tyres will be in the comments below. Go and review your tyres over at tyrereviews.com, as it really helps the channel. If you have any questions about this test, please do ask below, and as always, safe motoring.